What if 5 minutes could clear the fog that keeps you from thinking straight? What if an ancestral body-based practice, recovered from texts tucked away in a desert library, offers a simple way to test whether your attention can come back to its source? If you give me 5 minutes and your own hands and voice, you can try it now and see what happens. According to texts found at Nag Hammadi and passages in the Gospel of Philip, a set of gestures and short declarations were used as a practical aid for what the tradition calls anamnesis, remembering who you are. This is not a claim that everybody will feel the same result, nor is it a medical test. It is an invitation to an embodied experiment. If this invitation touches you, I'll ask one small thing a little later. In 1945, a set of manuscripts was discovered near Nag Hammadi in Egypt. These writings, the so-called Nag Hammadi Library, contain a number of texts that preserve a different way of speaking about spiritual life than the familiar canonical Gospels. The Gospel of Philip, one of these texts, speaks in images about memory, origin, and the recovery of self-knowledge. Scholars debate what all of it means, but within this tradition there is a practical emphasis. Certain points of the body were viewed as places where recollection could be stirred, where one could feel an inner confirmation rather than simply accept a teaching on authority. The phrasing in these manuscripts is often poetic, and the communities that preserved them used ritual and touch alongside words to cultivate clarity. I say this because the practice I'll guide you through is framed by those texts, so we treat it as an esoteric traditions technique, not as a canonical doctrine or a clinical procedure. Before we move into the practice, one short invitation. If at any point during the exercise you notice something, a subtle warmth, a shift in thinking, a sense of focus, type the single word recognition in the comments. That one-word response helps shape a communal field of testimony without turning your experience into proof for anyone else. It's simply a small recognition that you paid attention to your own process. To understand why a 5-minute ritual might make sense, consider the cosmology that appears in these texts, not as literal geology, but as metaphorical mapping of experience. The tradition names a primordial source, often called the monad, the singular origin from which experience and awareness emerge. Then it describes a secondary creative force, sometimes called the demiurge, that fashions the material realm and, in doing so, can obscure direct contact with the source. Between the soul and its remembrance, the texts speak of archons, forces or pattern makers that create fog, distraction, and repeated doubt. Think of them as habitual interruptions, the rapid reflex that pulls your attention away, the compulsion to fixate on worry, the small inner voice that insists you don't know enough. In contemporary language, the image is simple. A deep, quiet source of knowing is covered, in places, by noise. What the tradition suggests is that subtle embodied actions can act like tiny sieves, opening awareness briefly, allowing pockets of clarity to surface. If that feels abstract, imagine your mind like a clear pool. Wind ripples the surface, dust falls, a passing animal bends the reeds. The pool's depth hasn't changed, but the surface can look cluttered. The practice is a way to lift a corner of that surface so light can enter, and you can see depth again, even if just for a moment. It will not be dramatic for everyone. For many, it is a quiet, unmistakable clarity. For others, it is simply a shift in how they notice a thought. All of those are valid. The practical map for this exercise comes down to 3 points the texts highlight as loci of recognition. I'll name them, describe where to find them on your body, and tell you what kind of sensation people often notice. These are not anatomical diagnoses. They are places where attention lands during the ritual and where the tradition places symbolic meaning. The first point sits at the base of the skull, the area where your neck meets your head, just behind the spine. Place one hand there with the fingers resting along the uppermost part of your neck and the palm cradling the skull. In the language of the tradition, this point is associated with origin, the seal or root of remembrance. When people bring attention there, They sometimes notice a subtle depth, a hollowed space, a sense of grounding, or a pressure that feels like a hinge. Some feel nothing at all. Others report a faint warmth or the impression of a hinge unlocking. Gently place your hand without pressing hard. Let your fingers feel the outline of the bone and the subtle textures of the skin. You are simply checking in, sensing whether this area will open for you. The second point is along the outer edge of the hand, the line that runs between the small finger and the wrist, where the hand's lateral border meets the wrist crease. This spot is connected in the tradition to perception, the ability to see beyond habit, sometimes called second sight in older sources. When you bring attention to this border, you might notice a tingling, a coolness, or a heightened sensitivity to touch. Others find it inert. That is fine. With the fingers of your other hand, trace slowly along that outer edge, feeling for texture, imagining a line that connects from wrist to pinky. You are exploring a threshold of perception. The third point is in the center of the chest, slightly above the heart, and a little toward the front, what some texts call the externum. Rest 2 fingers lightly there, not pressing into the rib cage, but resting on the soft space above it. The tradition links this place to declaration, to the voice that speaks from authority. Touching this point while speaking helps align the body with a declarative tone. People sometimes notice an openness, a small expansion, a sense that the chest has room. Some report a subtle pulse or the feeling of being able to name something with less doubt. Again, many notice nothing at first. That does not mean the practice is useless. It simply means your experience is particular to you. Take a moment now to locate those 3 places on yourself: the base of the skull, the lateral line of the hand, the center of the chest. Do this with calm breathing. Find them, rest your hands, and notice any small physical detail: temperature, texture, tiny pressure, or absence. Nothing to prove. Simply observe with curiosity. When you are ready to try the 5-minute ritual, know that the structure is simple. Breathe to quiet the nervous system, check the 3 points in sequence, and speak a short declarative phrase aloud. The whole thing can be done seated, with your back supported, in a quiet corner, or even standing if you prefer. Keep your touch gentle, exploratory, and comfortable. This is not an invasive procedure. It is a way to draw the attention of your body into alignment with your spoken intention. Begin by closing your eyes or softening your gaze. Bring both feet to the floor. Rest your hands in your lap. Take a slow, deep breath in through the nose, filling the lower belly, then the chest, and exhale fully through the mouth. Repeat this 3 times. Allow the exhale to lengthen slightly longer than the inhale so your system begins to settle. With each breath, imagine the noise in your mind settling like dust after a boat passes through still water. Now place your hand at the base of your skull. Rest there for a few steady breaths. Notice the weight of your hand against the skin. Attend to any sensation, a pressure like a seal being touched, a coolness, warmth, even the absence of sensation. Hold this gentle attention without trying to force anything. The instruction is simply to be present and feel whether the space responds. If a stray thought appears, this is silly. Nothing is happening. Notice it as a thought and bring your attention back to the hand at the skull. This noticing is essential. The tradition suggests that intrusive skepticism is part of the field, and noticing it without argument is itself part of the practice. After a few breaths, slide your hand away and bring the fingers of your other hand along the lateral edge of your dominant hand, from the wrist toward the pinky. Trace slowly, as if you are reading Braille. Feel the edge, the junction of skin and bone, the subtle give at the wrist. Rest there for a few breaths, letting your breath steady. The task is not to create a sensation, but to pay careful, kind attention to the border between inner and outer. You may notice that your perception seems to sharpen, colors in your mind, the movement of thoughts, or a small increase in alertness. Or you may notice nothing at all. Both are normal. Finally, bring your fingers to the center of your chest, at the sternum. Rest lightly. Take a breath in, and as you exhale, allow your chest to soften. Keep a gentle focus on the point beneath your fingertips. If a feeling of openness arises, name it silently. Open, and return to the point. If you feel a rush of skepticism, say to that thought, without judgment, "I hear you," and redirect your attention to the chest. This practice trains the voice of declaration to align with a felt center rather than mere rhetoric. Now, for the verbal part of the ritual. The Gospel of Philip and related communities used short, declarative phrases as a way to anchor experience in language. Speak the following aloud, with intention and clarity. I recognize my origin. I activate my perception. I declare my command. Say it slowly, one phrase at a time, letting the sound vibrate in your mouth and chest. Allow there to be a pause of a breath between each clause. You do not need to shout. Use the natural tone of your voice. If you prefer, you can say the phrases under your breath, but speaking aloud tends to produce a tactile feedback that helps the body register the claim. Repeat the sequence: base of skull, lateral hand edge, center chest, spoken declaration, once more. The whole cycle should take about 5 minutes when you allow a few breaths at each point and a mindful pace for speaking. If your mind races during any part, notice the racing and return to the hands and the phrases. The tradition recognizes that resistance is a good sign. The more your system objects loudly, the more likely something is shifting beneath that resistance. Do not engage the resistant thought in argument. Treat it as noise on the radio. Acknowledge it and return to tuning the dial. People often report a predictable pattern right after the exercise. Immediately, a skeptical dialectic may spike. Thoughts that insist you imagined the sensation, that you are making it up, or that it means nothing. Notice these thoughts, thank them for their input, and let them pass. This is not a failure. It is an expected reflex. In the language of the tradition, the archons often manifest as argumentative pensamentos meant to unseat recollection. Your task is simple. Observe and return attention to your felt center. Over time, the reflex weakens. At first, it often appears strong. What might happen after you finish? Some people describe clarity like light slipping under a curtain. Thoughts that were muddled become slightly more ordered, a calm focus arrives, or a subtle warmth spreads through the chest. Others notice a small sharpening of perception, a neighborly vividness to sounds and colors. Some feel nothing at all. All of these outcomes are valid. The practice is an invitation to embodied verification. You try it, you notice, and you report honestly to yourself. The tradition values the inner witness more than external testimony. There are a few cautions to keep in mind. This exercise is experiential and rooted in an esoteric tradition. It is not a substitute for medical care or psychological counseling. The points we are touching are described in symbolic language by the texts and are not clinical markers of neural conditions. If you have any medical concerns related to the neck, hands, or chest, consult a professional before experimenting with sustained physical pressure. Keep your touch gentle. If you feel pain or dizziness, stop. The ritual is meant to be calming, not harmful. If during the ritual you notice strong emotional material, surprising sadness, anger, or intense images, stay present and breathe. If you feel overwhelmed, place your hands on your knees, open your eyes, and ground yourself by naming 5 things you can see around you. If the material persists in a way that is destabilizing, seek support from a qualified professional. The practice is an invitation, not a cure. As you incorporate the ritual into your life, remember that repetition tends to deepen its effects. The tradition suggests brief, regular activations rather than occasional marathon sessions. 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes before a demanding task, or 5 minutes at the close of the day can all function as small recalibrations. Keep expectations modest. The aim is not to produce a dramatic conversion, but to train your attention to recognize its own source more readily. There is a social dimension worth mentioning. These practices were not always solitary. Communities gathered and affirmed one another's experiences. If you found anything at all, a warmth, a quieter mind, a small lift, type the single word recognition in the comments below. That small act of communal testimony helps others know they are not alone in their impressions, without pressuring anyone to match an experience. If nothing happened, you can still type the word and note that your experience was quiet. Participation matters as a shared field rather than as proof. Before I close, I want to be clear about the source and the limits of what I've shared. The framing and practices here draw on material attributed to the Nag Hammadi library and the Gospel of Philip. When I say that, I mean these are references within an esoteric stream of early Christian literature and related writings. Scholars of these texts offer many interpretations, and the descriptions I've used are one plausible way to render their imagery as a practical discipline. This is not a claim that mainstream church teachings endorse these methods, nor is it a claim that canonical scripture contains the same formulas. Treat this as an experiential technique from within a specific tradition, not as a universal religious or medical truth. If you practiced with me today, take a moment to notice how your mind and body feel now compared with 5 minutes ago. Breathe again, settle your shoulders, and observe. If something shifted even slightly, you have direct evidence of your own noticing. If you felt nothing, that is also informative. Your nervous system may need different timing, repetition, or simply a different approach. Either way, you acted as your own investigator. If this short activation resonated, there are ways to continue exploring. Longer breath practices, journaling about what rises after the activation, or repeating the 5-minute cycle over a week and noting changes. I'm preparing a follow-up that offers longer activations and ways to work with the natural resistance that appears. Subscribe to the channel if you want to be notified when that material becomes available. Above all, treat this as an inner experiment. Use your own experience as the measure. One last reassurance. The practice is intended to cultivate an embodied sense of clarity, not to prove your worth, bestow authority, or diagnose your condition. It is a tool that may help you recover a sense of origin and a clearer voice. Approach it with curiosity, gentleness, and patience. If you felt anything at all during the exercise, no matter how small, type recognition in the comments now. It's a small way of saying you paid attention to your own process. If you'd like deeper practices that expand this activation into longer sessions, subscribe and watch the next video where we build on this foundation. Thank you for giving 5 minutes to your own attention. May the practice help you find clearer thinking, one gentle activation at a time.